timing.
How tall are you?
About 3 feet shorter than Jim.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We are live again here at the Valley Forge Brew Beef and Ale in beautiful downtown Valley Forge. And if anybody was upset by my comment about George Washington in Cabin 7 earlier, look at the evidence. Sorry. We are at the Agorist Unconference. We're at the end of a fine afternoon here at Valley Forge. We've heard from 4 excellent speakers, part of the 75 speakers that are part of this overall conference, running on 4 channels. There's enough liberty going on simultaneously to set anybody on fire. A lot of people have worked to make this happen. Among those people who sponsored the feed are freekeen.com, K-E-E-N-E, I've been misspelling that one too, Foundation for a Free Society, thelibertyvoice.com, Freedom Engineering Project, Global Net of Anarchy and Peace, the Fully Informed Jury Association, Center for a Stateless Society, Porkfest, Edgar the Exploiter, WeUseCoins.com, Dotson for Congress, DelValSilver.com, the Montgomery County Libertarian Party, which I'm happy secretary of course, TruthFreedomAndProsperity.org, Valley Forge Beef and Ale, LarkenRose.com, if that wasn't enough. Our next speaker needs no introduction, so I'm not going to give him one. No, instead, oops, I had his book up here. He is, of course, Larken Rose. People are handing me his book, Most Dangerous Superstition. He is a self-described tax heretic and enemy of the state, and it's not just Larken who describes him that way. He's a dedicated husband and father, which is difficult to do on top of everything else. I guess he could have gotten something out of Mike's talk here. His convictions have led him to boldly challenge the legitimacy of the IRS in federal court, resulting in, as we all know, his being kidnapped for quite a while by the quote-unquote Justice Department. But he remains unbowed. Who's surprised by that? Certainly not me. He's also a prolific writer. He's got columns. He's got his email list with thousands of people on it. And he has 3 books. How to Be a Successful Tyrant, The Iron Web, which we saw the symbol of earlier today, and his latest book, The Most Dangerous Superstition. To tell us now how we can mentally prepare to create free markets, join me in giving a warm Valley Forge welcome to Larken Rose.
See if you got the mic short enough for me here. Who here is a criminal? It's pretty good. It's about half of you. And I wasn't asking if you've been caught or if you've been convicted, just whether you're a criminal. Who here has ever driven over the speed limit? Come on. Ever smoked pot? I didn't. I'm a prude. But ever had a gun where the law says you're not supposed to? I've done that one. Everybody here is a criminal, by the definition that almost everyone uses. Now, when I said who here is a criminal, about half of you raised your hands. Now, if I asked that in a crowd of normal people who listen to the mainstream media all the time, probably would have gotten a lot fewer than that raising their hands. Even though, if I went on and said, well, have you ever driven over the speed limit, they'd say, yeah, I smoked pot, and I did this, and I did that, and the other thing. Why would people not want to say, yes, I'm a criminal? Well, the term criminal has an obvious negative connotation. If I say, who here is a criminal, it sounds to almost everybody, including a bunch of you apparently, like, who here is a bad, nasty person? And nobody wants to say, yep, that's me, I'm horrible, I'm the scum of the earth. The truth of the matter is, to be a criminal, by the definitions used by people in power, means you disobeyed the politicians. And that's all it means. But when people say, I'm not a criminal, they're not just meaning, I've never disobeyed the politicians. First of all, that's not true of anybody in the world, unless you've spent your whole life in one room and never done anything. But the concept of crime has been smashed into our heads. It has its technical meaning and then the connotation it carries. The technical meaning is you disobeyed a politician. Whoopee-doo. So is everybody in the world who's more than 3 years old. The other connotation is you're a bad person because you are a criminal. Now, the obvious implication there is that you have a moral obligation to do whatever the politicians tell you to do. Now, if I asked, are you a murderer? And you said no, it's because you know that murder is bad and you don't want to be called a murderer. If I asked, are you a thief, or do you just beat people up for fun, or do you do all, defraud people and do nasty things like that, you would say no, and you would have a reason to be proud of the fact that you don't do those things, because those things are inherently wrong. But if I ask if you're a criminal, all it means is, have you ever done anything that the politicians told you not to? The trouble is, we have been trained to believe that good people obey politicians. And that belief is so ingrained in people that they literally cannot separate the idea of politicians bossing us around and morality. They associate obedience with being good. The two have nothing to do with each other at all, ever. If you obey a law to not murder, good for you, because murder's bad, but the law isn't why it's bad. If you obey a law that says don't steal, good for you, because stealing's bad, but the law is not why it's bad. If you disobeyed any one of the hundreds of thousands of state or local or federal laws that don't prevent you from hurting anybody, they just say, here's what you have to do and here's what you're not allowed to do just because we say so, there is nothing at all immoral about that, which is why I am proud to say I am a criminal. I do the right thing when the politicians tell me to do the wrong thing. If I ask people, are you a law-abiding taxpayer? So many people will say, yes, absolutely. And hardly any of them, if I'm asking the general public, have ever thought about the question or what the term means. Law-abiding. Well, the question isn't, do you hurt other people, or are you nice, are you helpful, are you productive? Law-abiding means, do you abide by the law? And the law are the decrees issued by the ruling class, the politicians. So to say, I am law-abiding, while people think that's a reason to be proud, all you're doing is saying, I do whatever the politicians tell me to. Ew. Why would you be proud of that? How about the taxpayer part? I do whatever the politicians tell me to, and I give them my money. Why do people wear that as a badge of honor? It's exactly as noble and virtuous as saying, yeah, I live in a city where there's a mafia. I do whatever they tell me to, and I always give them their cut. There's no reason to be proud of that. There is no reason to be proud of being a law-abiding taxpayer. There is a reason to be ashamed of it, because it is the law-abiding taxpayers who pay for all of the atrocities committed by government, whether it's the war on drugs, whether it's killing people overseas just for the fun of whatever tyrant happens to be in power at the moment, whether it's putting someone in a cage for trying to trade with pieces of silver. Holy smokes. Whether it's any number of things that the people who call themselves government and authority do, the law-abiding taxpayers are the ones allowing it to happen and paying for it. Now, if you're a law-abiding taxpayer because you don't want to be put in a cage, okay, that's understandable. It's like saying, well, I'm a carjacking victim because the guy was going to shoot me if I didn't give him my car. But don't say, I am a carjacking victim. It's not a reason to be proud. Yeah, maybe you have to do it to preserve your own behind, but it's not a reason to be proud. Now that brings up an important distinction when it comes to the control freaks telling you what to do. There is obviously a reason to comply out of fear in a lot of cases, because they have lots of unthinking mercenaries with guns, and they have cages to put you in, and they will do nasty things to you if they catch you disobeying. So the fear is perfectly rational. But I want to talk about the biggest obstacle to having a free market, voluntary interaction, voluntary cooperation, a free society. It is not that fear. It is guilt. Most people literally feel profound guilt when they disobey politicians because they've been trained to feel guilt if they evade taxes. They cheated on their taxes. You cannot cheat on taxes any more than you can cheat on a carjacker. You cannot cheat a thief. It's not cheating. The concept that they have a right to take from you by force to pay for whatever they want, and that you have a moral obligation to hand it over so they can go have a war or whatever other stupid idea they want to do. The notion that it is a sin for you to disobey and not fund the ruling class is insane, but almost everyone in the country suffers from it. To put it in a nutshell, in this country, if you do some work for somebody and they pay you, and then you go and spend the money and buy something else, you're a criminal. It's against the law to earn money and spend money without giving a cut to the crooks in Washington. Now, if you're scared of what they might do to you, I can sympathize. Maybe I can sympathize better than most people. You put me in a cage for a year. But if you obey out of a feeling of guilt, if you disobey because you view their commands as laws, and you view disobedience to politicians as crime, then the problem, the obstacle to having a free society and free trade is not in Washington, it's not in Harrisburg, it's still between your own ears. You have to understand you are beholden to no one above your own conscience. You never have an obligation to give a penny to anyone who claims to be authority or government or anything else just because they said, we say so, and you have to because it's the law. Most people, when you talk about living free, there's two ways to try to accomplish living free. One is living free with permission. And a lot of the freedom movement revolves around we want to live free with permission, which means we want to elect somebody who will get into office and say, you're allowed to be free. And then we'll all say yay and we'll have a party and be free, despite the fact that it's never happened in the history of the universe. All of the pushing for legislation, please politicians, will you please write down on paper that we're allowed to have guns, that we're allowed to keep what we earn, that we're allowed to put what we want in our own bodies. Will you please give us permission to do these things? Will you please legislate it? Will you please make your law say that we're allowed to own ourselves? There are two problems with that approach. One, it doesn't ever work. If you ask a tyrant, will you let me be free? What do you think he's going to say? No, you can't be. Sorry, try again next year. There's another problem. If you believe that you need the politician's permission to be free, you aren't free and you never will be. Compare it to a slave, a plantation slave. He has two options. Every week he thinks of this great speech and he goes up to his master and says, here's why I believe the moral, the righteous thing is for you to give me my freedom and declare me a free man. And the plantation owner says, no. And the slave says, bummer. The second option is the slave says, wow, you don't own me. You pretend you do, you imagine you do. Even some of my fellow slaves imagine that you do, but you don't. Goodbye. The first will never achieve freedom because the person isn't even free inside their own head. They believe that they need the permission of someone else to keep what they earn, to make their own choices, to run their own lives. As long as you believe that, in other words, as long as you respect politician commands as the law, you will never be free because you believe you are the property of other human beings. And as long as you believe that, they're going to believe it too, and they're going to treat you likewise. Now, there are two steps. If the goal is to be free, and of course this ties in with free trade is really being free. Because if you say, oh, you can live where you want, you can do what you want, but every time any property exchanges hands, you give us a cut, you're a slave. If a plantation owner says, you can live where you want, you can smoke what you want, you can eat what you want, you can say what you want, but we still get half of what you produce, you're still a slave. Free trade is freedom. If you can't trade the products of your labor, you're somebody else's slave. Accomplishing freedom. Obviously, there are two steps. One, you want as many people as possible who understand that they own themselves. If you completely understand it, you completely grasp the concept of self-ownership and totally philosophically get it, and you're the only one in the world, you're in big trouble. Because not only are the masters going to stomp on you, but all of your fellow slaves are going to stomp on you if you say, I have the right to keep what I earn. I have the right to make my own decisions. Your fellow slaves will stomp on you. And we just saw a fine example of Bernard von Nothaus. It was not the control freaks who gave the final word that he was to be put in a cage for trading with silver. It was 12 slaves of the state who said, yes, that man is bad for trading with silver. Now, luckily, in this country, they still need some of the slaves to give their okay before they can put someone in a cage, although they're trying to do away with that too. Unluckily, most of the slaves will say, you broke the law, or even authority says you broke the law, you're bad, you belong in a cage. Because the members who sit on juries absolutely and profoundly and truly believe that they are the property of the ruling class. They won't describe it that way. They will say, we're law-abiding taxpayers. That means you're the property of the United States Congress. And they believe that, and they believe it so firmly that they cannot imagine how anybody could be so horrible as to earn money and then spend it. How can anyone do something that despicable when the politicians decreed by way of their official legislation, you have to give us a cut? Most people literally cannot comprehend being free. The reason they're not free is they can't even understand what it would mean to be free. The vast majority, even the people out there being activists trying to accomplish something, all they're trying to accomplish is getting a nicer slave master. We want someone holding the whip who doesn't hit us as hard, who doesn't hit us as often, who doesn't make us pick as much cotton every day. Yeah, that might be an improvement, but first of all, you're not going to get it by whining to the master, and second of all, you will still be a slave. The mental preparation for being free is understanding that you were born owning yourself. And the problem is almost no one in the country understands that. And that is why when I ask, are you a law-abiding taxpayer? And people go, yay, I say, only when you understand that that is nothing to be proud of will you ever be free, and will you ever be able to claim ownership of your own life. Now, like I said, the first step is getting as many people as we possibly can to understand that they own themselves. And that if I trade with you and it's mutually voluntary, that's it. We have no obligation to give a rat's behind what any politician says we have to do. We have to send them a cut, or we have to jump through these regulatory hoops. No, we don't. I own me, you own you. If we do a trade between us, it's mutually voluntary. It is nobody else's business, and I don't care what any law says about it. because I was not born owned by Congress who says, here's the law. Again, if you're the only one, or one of two, or one of 100 who understands that you own yourself, the masters and the other slaves are going to stomp on you. So we have to get as many former slaves as we possibly can to realize we don't have to answer to this. We don't need them. They don't serve us. They exploit us and control us. They are aggressors and thieves, and nothing more. The second step is, okay, so we got a bunch of people who can do that. Now what? Because of course, the people in power, the slave masters, they aren't just going to say, oh, you figured out that you own yourselves. Go ahead. Never mind. We'll leave you alone. They will say, we're going to stomp on you every chance we get. We are going to blatantly use violence in front of everybody to scare the other slaves into doing as they're told, which, by the way, is terrorism. The biggest terrorist organization is the United States government. The IRS, what does it do? It publicly goes after people to scare everyone else into submission. How can that not be terrorism? How many people are scared of the IRS? Almost everybody. Who's happy when they get a piece of mail that says Internal Revenue Service on it? Oh, goody. People are terrified because the United States government is a system of terrorism, like every government. You will obey, and if we can't convince you that you have a moral obligation to obey, then we'll convince you that we will hurt you if you don't. But again, it is that minuscule minority of people that they have to scare with the threat of hurting them, because most people fall for the line about you're obligated to. Because when we, the ruling class, say you must do this, it's law. And when you disobey, it's crime, which means you're a bad, bad person and you deserve whatever we do to you. And again, most of the slaves believe that. Now, I recently posted a very simple, almost silly video on YouTube. If you go to youtube.com/Larken Rose, called The Tiny Dot. And it shows, I don't know if we, oh, there it is. It's not the same representation, but it's close enough. See that gigantic black square that's surrounded blue? That's us. That is the approximately 100 million people who get extorted by the United States Congress. You see down on the right, that tiny little stripe thing, that is all of the employees of the Internal Revenue Service combined. Of that, about 3% have any power to actually seize property or are ever armed. So the ones who actually carry out the extortion, it's a dot almost too small to see. Speaking of dots too small to see, underneath that one that you can barely see is a dot that represents the number of U.S. congressmen. The reason you can't see it is it's 1 pixel. Here's us. The dot you can't see is the people who take a huge chunk of what we earn. They do not do that by fear, because never in a million years would that gigantic throng be scared of the dot that's too small to see. Even all their enforcers are a puny little dot. They do it because they have been taught that they have a moral imperative to give huge sums of money, for some people half of what they earn, to the tiny little speck that you can't even see, to spend on whatever they want. These schemes, warmongering, all sorts of fun oppressions done in the name of fighting terrorism and accomplishing justice. When you actually see, and in the video online it zooms in and out, so you can see the ridiculous difference between the victims of legal extortion and the perpetrators of it. When you see it, the reason I made the video is because it immediately strikes people as, why do we do this? We cry to Congress, please lower our taxes. You got a gigantic throng begging a microscopic dot to let us keep what we earn. What a bizarre situation. Why do we ask them? Why do we care what they think? Why do we even talk to them at all? By comparison, the LA street gang, the Crips, they have more armed enforcers than the IRS. How well do you think it would work if the Crips said, hey, everyone in the country, you have to pay an income tax to us? Next day, no more Crips. A lot of messy streets to clean up in LA, but they're gone. Because this scam doesn't work just out of the fear. It works because the throng has been duped into believing that the commands of the dot are law, and that obedience is a moral obligation, and that disobedience is a crime. Now, when you have the statistical differences in front of you, most of what activists try to do, and no offense, but I have to speak the truth as I see it, is utterly ridiculous. They look at the dot. This giant throng looks at the microscopic dot and says, we got to petition them more and write letters to them and call their offices and maybe put in a new dot. And all these things, instead of just saying, why do we care what the dot thinks? You know, number it almost 1,000,000 to 1. Why do we pay any attention? Why do we spend all this effort? Please let us be free. I'll tell you why. Because we're not free up here. If we were free up here, we wouldn't have even heard of the United States Congress. Every once in a while, one of us might hear some rumor that there's a group of a few hundred megalomaniacs in D.C. who think they own us. And we go, never heard of them, I don't really care. But we've been taught to think that we are beholden to them. So this minuscule dot, every ounce of its power comes from what's messed up in our heads because we've been trained to bow to authority and government and trained to think that if we want to be free, we need the dot's permission. Now, a lot of people will bring up, well, they have those enforcers, still a pretty tiny dot. They also have the military, which maybe they would use it. They have these nasty people. Here's where it gets really sad. The dot doesn't make up the enforcers. The enforcers come from the throng. In other words, the people are so indoctrinated into the belief that we're beholden to the dot that some of them will take jobs to grab a gun and go to other people in the throng and say, you didn't give money to the dot. It's slaves whipping slaves. Your congressman isn't going to come and arrest you. Your congressman isn't going to come put you in a cage. Someone else in the throng is going to. And you can bet that that someone has been very thoroughly indoctrinated into the belief in authority and government. He truly believes that if you disobey a politician, you are an evil person and you deserve to be put in a cage or killed if you resist. And you can see it in what juries do. You can see it in comments all over the internet of, you know, if there's some drug task force, oh, they kicked down his door and shot him 20 times in front of his family. Well, he had pot. Oh, come on. And you, land of the free? You don't kill someone because they smoke a leaf. And then the people who say that, yeah, you're drinking pot. What's the difference between drinking beer and smoking pot? The dot said you're allowed to do one, you're not allowed to do the other. So we have paramilitary invasions of homes across the country. Huge amounts of money spent on just horribly draconian overt violence against nonviolent people. And most people, when they see someone get victimized by that, said, well, he broke the law, so he deserved it. Those people are slaves in their own heads. As long as they're slaves there, their bodies are going to be enslaved too. When I hear of people, we need an election to get a new dot, or we need to petition the dot to lower taxes. In other words, we need the dot to give us permission to keep more of what we earn. We need to push for this or that legislation. I just want to shake my head. The problem is not the dot. We wouldn't know the dot existed if not for the real problem, which is the throng. The throng that has been convinced that they have a moral obligation to do as they are told by the dot. If they lost that delusion, if they lost that superstition, the nice thing is you don't need another election. You don't need a revolution. You don't need anything. Crips, never heard of them. They're on the other side of the country. I don't care what they say. U.S. Congress, don't really care what they say. A bunch of lunatics as far as everything I've heard. I keep what I earn. But that will not happen as long as people believe they are the rightful property of the dot. As long as they believe that, they're going to go through the ridiculous spectacle of having a throng of 100 million victims of this extortion racket begging the dot to please be nice to us. That's why I say the biggest obstacle to freedom is not the control freaks. It is not their mercenaries. It is what is between the ears of 300 million Americans. Now, of course, their mercenaries are very real, and the control freaks in Washington are very real, and the things they do are ridiculous and evil and aggressive violence and all that. But we are the ones who give it power by imagining it to be legitimate. Now I say we, I think this is pretty much an exception to the rule in front of me. But the American people are the ones who give the slave masters their power by imagining legitimacy to their threats and extortion. It's all illusion. The power of government is 100% illusion. And if you just look at the numbers, it's obvious that dot cannot possibly have power over us unless we imagine that it does. And unless some of us from the throng decide to become enforcers, to force the rest of the throng to obey the dot. We enslave ourselves because we were trained to. Now, can I see the last thing? This, I was happy to hear this came up a few times in the discussion. On the left, and you online viewers, I want to just describe it to you because you can't see it. On the left, we have a star. It's basically 9 points, 1 in the middle, and 8 lines going out to 8 points. That is sort of centralized control. Oh, goody, goody. There, now we do have one. Forgot who printed this. Here's the model of centralized control. If the control freaks send some of their thugs and knock out the middle hub, the whole thing is gone. You have 8 dots sitting around going, darn, what happened to the middle hub? The thing on the right, some of you might recognize it from the book The Iron Web. This is a very simple geometric image of 9 points with a line between every point and every other point. You can knock out any point you want. You can knock out any 2 points you want. You can knock out any 3 points you want. You can knock out half of them, and the rest will still form a nice, solid, interconnecting web. That is what freedom looks like. Centralized freedom, first of all, it isn't freedom if you need someone's permission. But even trying to set up a centralized organization that says, hey, everybody, come be free through us, is very vulnerable to the control freaks in Washington or Harrisburg or anywhere else, because all they have to do is pick the big wig standing up there who's the middle of the plan and knock him out. The beauty is this thing on the right, you don't have to organize it, you don't have to understand it, you don't have to know it exists. All you have to know is that you own yourself. This is what naturally happens among people who own themselves. If I know I own myself, and the guy who sells groceries down the street knows he owns himself, good, that's one line of connection. If I know I own myself, and somebody who wants me to mow their lawn knows he owns himself, there's another connection. As the number of people who understand that grows, the number of connections grows exponentially. And there is nothing in the world any group of control freaks could do to break that, ever. Even if they literally slaughtered half of them, the other half remains. And that is why, among all the political bickering between the left side of the tyrant and the right side of the tyrant that pretend to be 2 parties, among all the arguing over legislation and this and that and the other thing, what you will never hear in the mainstream media is anyone actually discussing the concept of authority and government. And some people, their heads are going to explode when I say this. Government isn't real. It's never existed. The people are real, their guns are real, the thugs are real. The people who claim the label of government, they're real, and the damage they do is real. But government means the group that has the right, the authority to rule us. And that is something we imagine. And it exists only because we imagine it. We imagine into existence lawmakers. There is no such thing as a lawmaker. There are lunatics in Washington who make up commands, and we hallucinate that those commands are binding on us. There are lunatics in Washington who make up demands and say, you have to give us money if you do this or this or this or this. And we hallucinate that they are something other than thugs and thieves. They're not. The authority exists only in the eyes of the beholder. And if we would look at the dot on the former thing, if we would look at that tiny little dot and realize they're human beings. They're not nice human beings. They're not honest human beings. They're not productive human beings. They're mostly corrupt slime balls, but they're still only human beings, which means they have no right to tax you any more than you have the right to tax them. They have no right to tell you what you can smoke any more than you have the right to tell them what to smoke. They're people. The authority, the law, the government, you imagine that. It was never there. It was never real. And I imagined it for a whole lot of years, and I was politically active, and I want this dot in power, and I want that dot to pass this legislation to give me permission to do this. The biggest obstacle to being free is knowing what freedom even is. And freedom is you own yourself. And when you ask somebody, do you own yourself? Everybody says, yeah. Well, does that mean nobody has a right to steal from you? Oh, yeah. What about taxes? Oh, that's different. No, you think it's different because you were taught that it's different. You were taught that when that tiny little dot robs you under threat of violence, it's taxation, it's law, it's the price we pay for civilization. No, it's just armed robbery. That's all it is. And if the victims of it recognize that, it would be over. Again, don't need a revolution, don't need an election, don't need any new legislation, don't need to repeal anything, abolish anything. Just have to understand that you already own yourself. Now, whenever I talk about this, and that's, as Mike so elegantly spoiled the punchline, because no, I spoil it on page 2, that is the most dangerous superstition, is the belief in authority. And it is very hard to escape from it because we are all indoctrinated into believing it so thoroughly, so profoundly, so completely that it doesn't feel like a belief. Believing in government, what do you mean believing in government? It's like believing in the sun. Of course it's real, of course it's there, of course it's legitimate. And breaking out of that, for a lot of people I know, has been a very freeing and very uncomfortable process. Because inside the comfortable authoritarian mindset that we were raised in, it feels perfectly safe and good to say, we're going to demand that our leaders pass this, and we're going to demand this, and we're going to elect this guy who will do that. But it feels really uncomfortable to say, it's all a lie. There are no leaders, there are no government, there is no authority, there is no law. There's you, there's morality, there's your conscience, that's all. And the world looks completely different when you understand the fiction of every ruling class. And that's what government is. And it's a servant of the people and it represents us. They make up all this happy, completely nonsensical rhetoric to try to make it sound like it's not a ruling class of control freaks. And the book actually goes through a bunch of that terminology and points out what we're taught as civics is patently, obviously idiotic. And if you actually back up and look at it, you realize all of these terms that everyone spouts, everyone repeats, they don't make any sense. Consent of the governed. There's no such thing. If you have my consent, it's mutually voluntary. If you're governing me, it's not. It's one or the other. You can't have both. They represent us, okay? They represent us by demanding our money to pay for things we don't want. Okay, that makes loads of sense. Write down the list. The entire basis of the belief in government is insane. It's a superstition and it's insane. And it's really uncomfortable to admit that when you've believed it your whole life. It was really uncomfortable for me. I did my kicking and screaming along the way before coming to the realization I own myself means nobody else owns me. I have to do what I think is right, which means no law is ever legitimate. No government is ever legitimate. No one claiming the right to rule is ever legitimate. And it's a really disturbing realization, because you look out at the world and you see, this is not the world I grew up in. It's like a slave coming to realize, you don't own me. And then you can be free. We're going to have an open discussion next hour, but if you have questions now or want to start screening things, or
We got a couple web questions that came in during your talk.
okay,
A lot of comments too. You generated more comments than all the other speakers put together.
lots negative, I hope.
No, some of it was funny. I thought it was out, damn Dot. Another one said, you're spot on, Larken. And another was bad Dot, no donut. But I got two questions here that went by. First one, what would you say to the past you who thought he was free when he wasn't?
The question was, what would I say to the past me back when I was a statist? That question constantly haunts me, because I'm trying to think, how can I make people let go of their mental enslavement? And so I think back to me, what could I have said to the me that was a statist? You know, I was raised conservative and libertarian leaning, but conservative Republican-ish. And I think, what could I possibly have said? And I've come to the conclusion that we can put these ideas in front of people, and we can make it as logical and rational and coherent as we can. Ultimately, it is always an individual decision. I don't know why I made it, and I don't know why anybody else makes it. Sometimes the slave goes, I'm not supposed to be a slave. And I still don't know why it happens. And I wish I knew some magic words. All I know is to get a whole bunch of ideas sitting in front of all the slaves. So if any of them goes, maybe I'm not supposed to be a slave, they can go from there. But even in my own case, I don't know what made me ever question that. I have no idea, because it totally, and I don't even see a correlation between where people start politically. I've had libertarians that for years and years and years will scream bloody murder at me when I say government is completely bogus and illegitimate by definition. And then I've had some people who are devout collectivist socialists, and a week later they said, yeah, you're right, it's all bogus. It's just a step, and it's a digital step. You can't, well, I sort of own myself. I own 73% of myself, and Congress owns the other 27%. There's no such thing. You own yourself or you don't. And that last step is really existentially disturbing for almost everybody. It was for me. I don't know why I took it, and I don't know what I could say to the old me to make me take that step. I think there is nothing. I think it's just you put the ideas in front of people, and some will open their eyes and some won't, and that's all we can do.
I've just been reread your book, The Iron Web, and one of the things that I find very interesting about it is the three personalities that are represented by David, Keith, and Doug. And I'm wondering two things maybe. Do you see yourself as one of those three, or and maybe even more important, how do you see those three personalities as being, let's say, more or less effective in the kind of thing we're talking about here? Would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, the question was about the characters in The Iron Web, which is my novel. Fiction, sort of, a little too close to the truth to be pleasant. And the different characters in it have different viewpoints and different ways of approaching it. I intentionally didn't have this guy's right and this guy's not. A lot of the debates between the different personalities, David Singh is very polite and rational and academic and understanding and soft-spoken. And then there's some others that are rather vicious and obnoxious, like me. And a lot of it actually reflects discussions I've had mainly with my wife, Tessa, because she's a lot politer and a lot more civil and diplomatic than I am. If I think somebody's advocating evil, I say, you're advocating evil, stop being an idiot. And she says, where can we meet common ground? And I basically put that into the book and left it standing. Because I still have that discussion with some people. Some people get results being very sort of open-minded and let's see what we agree on. And some people sort of like the head-to-head smash, your idea is stupid, my idea is stupid, and then get into the guts of it. I think different things work on different people. Again, it's always the individual's choice whether they open their eyes. I sort of think the club in the head might have worked better on me when I was a statist, rather than someone nicely saying, well, here's another point of view you might want to consider. I would rather them hit me in the head and say, hey, moron, you're advocating that I be robbed to fund war, stop it. So I would have to back up and say, well, it's okay because it's for your own good. Oh, darn it, that's what the socialists say. Well, the end justifies it. No, can't use that. So some people, I think it works better if they're bludgeoned into it, and some people respond better to the nice, polite, non-confrontational thing. So I do the nasty version, and Tessa does the nice version. Get as many people as we can.
For what it's worth, I'm more like Keith and Doug, but I do have a great admiration and respect for the David character and his approach, for what that's worth. And actually, I aspire to be more like David than I do the others for that reason.
And I sometimes do too. Just try to be nicer and more civil. And I usually fail, and I'm just rude. Oh well. Anything else before the break? Yep.
Yeah, I wanted you to touch on something that's not rhetorical or presentation, but the whole fact that I think a lot of people, are afraid to be free. So just like the slave on the plantation, unless he sees that a number of slaves have escaped and are living freely and happily, I think that, advertising that there are a number of slaves living free and happily will probably do more than anything we say.
Exactly. Yeah, teaching by example. The question was about people are scared to be free. If they're used to living on a plantation, the unknown, being free is the unknown. And absolutely, I think most of the people in the world aren't even going to be able to contemplate actual freedom until they can see a bunch of people doing it.
Yeah.
Now, the downside of that is every time a bunch of people tries to do it, all the control freaks of the world are going to do whatever they can to stomp on them, so they can't make the example. I would just add that there are two levels of fear of freedom. One is sort of the practical level of, well, how will we do the roads, and what do we do with thieves and murderers, and sort of that realm of not sure how things would work, which isn't a good enough excuse to commit violence. But then there's another level of fear that's deeper and more existential. I think a lot of people are terrified of the idea that they're responsible for themselves and their actions. And that's why authority is so convenient for them. All I have to do is do as I'm told. I don't have to figure out right and wrong. I don't have to be responsible. I just did as I'm told. How many times have you heard that from Nazis and cops and bureaucrats? I didn't do anything. I just did as I was told, which means I'm not responsible. They like that irresponsibility. And so we'll cling to it to the detriment of humanity.
You think we teach our children to be slaves by telling them to do it because we tell you so?
Absolutely. I think.
Repeat the question, please.
Oh yeah. He was asking if we basically teach our children to be that way by saying things like, do it because I told you so. Yes, the belief in authoritarianism is started before they can even talk, before they can even understand language.
That leads right into one of the web questions we have. For every person realizing self-ownership, there are thousands being enslaved through school, media, etc. The state's rate of enslavement is much faster than our outreach. How would you counterbalance that?
I wouldn't. The question was basically, the authoritarianism is indoctrinating thousands of people every day while we try to slowly undo it and get people to understand self-ownership. As for saving the country, can't be done. Saving the world can't be done. Not anywhere in the short term. And that's not my goal. I want to get as many people as I can to understand self-ownership and to find a way to have those people be able to live as freely as possible. Again, to be able to show by example, this is what humanity is supposed to be. It's not supposed to be a plantation with slaves and masters. It's supposed to be human beings acting responsibly. But yeah, most people are not going to get that. They're not going to accept it. They're literally not going to be able to think about it until they can see a large-scale example of people saying, look, we each own ourselves, and it isn't bloody mayhem and starvation and death. Until then, they're not even going to be able to contemplate a life without their master.
And Knock is happy you answered his question.
Oh, good. Answered someone's question by accident. Okay. Well, should we break and then come back on top?
Yes.
I have to admit, I've been trying to get this man to come to Toastmasters for years. And I'm telling you, with all the talking he does, he's getting to the point now where I still want him to come to Toastmasters, but so that we can learn from him how to give a passionate speech. We have about 8 or 9 minutes. We're going to take a break, and then we're going to come back and we're going to have open discussion with Larken Rose. If you happen to stop to see our good friend James and get a copy of Larken's book, please do so. And we'll pause for a couple minutes. Thank you very much.